Hey guys, what up? Tominator here. So for this video, we're going to be discussing who is the most dominant Mr. Olympia of all time. And more specifically, what year brought the most unbeatable physique to the stage. So it's not enough just to say names. What I'm talking about here is, of all the 52 Mr. Olympia competitions that have been held to date, which one of these shows produced the best champion? In other words, if you took all 7 winning versions of Arnold, all 6 Dorian Yates, all 8 Haneys and Ronnies, etc., and you stood them on stage side by side, who would emerge victorious? Basically, we're talking about the King of Kings, the champ among champs, the GOAT. Now, obviously the answer to this question is going to be highly subjective. Most people are just going to go with their favorite Mr. Olympia, whether that's Arnold or Dorian or Phil, and then choose one of his best years, but that's not a very valid approach. It leaves way too much room for personal bias. Instead, what I recommend and what I'm going to do here is to put myself in the shoes of the judges, and ask yourself who they would pick. And considering that the modern bodybuilding judging criteria essentially boils down to 2 main factors, mass plus conditioning, with then probably full development and proportion and symmetry as secondary criteria, I think the answer is actually pretty straightforward. But before we get into that, it's got to be noted that in a list like this, the old school bodybuilders are going to be at a huge disadvantage. Guys like Sergio and Arnold and Frank Zane are going to be hard-pressed to compete with more recent champs like Cutler or Heath, because let's face it, the chemicals, if you will, and technology have simply advanced over the years, right? It's called progression. So these old school guys didn't have access to stuff like HGH and insulin, and the steroids they were taking back then were so minimal, they just don't really stand a chance, quite frankly. So yeah, this isn't a fair contest by any means, but that's not the point. Who said it had to be fair anyway? Life isn't fair, so cry me a river. Needless to say, this virtual showdown is heavily skewed towards the most recent bodybuilders. Even if you hate the current look of mass monsters and bloated bellies, there's no denying who would win if you took, say, a prime Arnold or Haney and plunked them next to Ronnie Coleman at his peak. Ronnie would obliterate them. Now, before you go smashing that dislike button in disgust, hear me out, because if you're a fan of these old school classic physiques, that's cool, I'm not ripping on you. I like the more athletic look with tight waistlines too. You know me, I'm a sucker for aesthetics. So in fact, I'd rather look like Arnold over Ronnie any day. But the cold hard truth is that none of the guys from the 60s, 70s, or 80s would even have a hope in cracking the top 10 at a current Mr. Olympia contest. They'd simply be getting dwarfed out there. So, in a purely objective contest, pretty much everybody prior to Dorian has to be ruled out automatically. But enough preamble, let's get to the point. So, who was the best Mr. Olympia ever? 3 words. Lightweight baby! Ronnie Coleman, 2003. And this isn't just my opinion. A bunch of other top bodybuilders and experts agree that, and you'll see quotes to the sides of many of these picks supporting my claim. Because for my money, this is undoubtedly the most dominating Mr. Olympia of all time. Was he a flawless champion? Hell no. His gut was a little bit bloated, and he looked pretty unflattering in certain pictures when he wasn't keeping it in check. But nonetheless, the reason I chose this version of Big Ron is that this year he had the best combination of size and conditioning of any champion in history, period. Sure, certain guys have been more ripped like Dorian or even Ronnie in his earlier days, right? Or better proportion like Lee Haney or Dexter Jackson. Lots of guys have had better symmetry, aesthetics, or presentation, like Phil or Zane or Arnold, but nobody has been bigger. So a 2003 Ronnie wins in terms of sheer muscle mass. True, he was technically heavier in 2004, but he also sacrificed too much conditioning to get there. And yes, I know what many of you are thinking right now, but Ronnie was better in 98 and 99. Alright, I agree that he was better overall those years in the sense that he was more aesthetic, his waist was tighter, and he was more defined back then as well, so overall I'd say he was kind of more balanced, and I definitely prefer that look of his too. But when you consider the fact that the judges are so preoccupied with mass and conditioning, they don't really care about aesthetics or nice lines or any of that. So I think for that reason, if you put them both on stage next to each other, the 2003 version would come out on top because of all that extra mass. And the other thing to keep in mind is that a 98 or 99 Ronnie Coleman wouldn't fare as well in today's day and age, especially in the lower body. So basically, since the turn of the century, if you don't bring Tom Platz-sized thighs, you're going to be hard-pressed to win the Sandow. Granted, Dexter managed it, but that was kind of fluky. It was a one-time thing against an off Jay Cutler in a shallow lineup. But anyway, You can see here how he suffers next to a 2015, or is that 2016? I'm not sure. But anyway, one of those versions of Phil. Sure, the upper body's close, but Phil is overpowering him in the quad department. But fast forward to 2003, and suddenly the tables have turned. Phil's no longer outmassing him so much downstairs, and Ronnie's now outsizing him upstairs. So, as these comparisons illustrate, it's a fact that the guys today are simply packing more mass in the legs than they used to, even back in the late 90s. And for that reason, I'm not so sure the earlier versions of Ronnie Coleman would measure up well against, say, a 2009 Jay Cutler or a Phil Heath. But his 2003 version definitely still does. And we've heard it time and time again that Mr. Olympias are one from the back. Well, a 2003 Ronnie is pretty hard to beat in that regard. Nobody can match him in the back double bicep or rear lat spreads, not even Phil Heath or Dorian. Sure, Phil comes close in the back double, but Ronnie just smokes him on size. This is actually an extremely flattering comparison for Phil. This is probably the very best picture you can find of him, whereas Ronnie's is, eh. Plus, if we, Dorian comes very close to the rear lat spread, but again, Ronnie edges him out on size, and he also just crushes him in the ham and glute department. It's definitely close in the back, and Dorian beats him in the calves, but I just don't think it would be enough, especially when you consider that in other poses, Ronnie smashes him so thoroughly. The front double bicep, the side chest, the most muscular, these are all landslide victories for him. Yes, Dorian would win the side tricep and the ab and thigh, and probably also take the front lat spread since he's the best to ever hit it, but Big Ron isn't far behind in that one. And if we go body part by body part, it's not really a contest. Dorian would win in the calves, abs, and arguably traps, lats, and forearms, arguably. But Ronnie is undeniably way better in the quads, hams, glutes, chest, shoulders, biceps, and triceps. So anyway you look at it, the bottom line is that an 03 Ronnie outmasses him too much, so even with his superior conditioning, Dorian, even at his best and biggest, could not beat him. Same goes for Phil Heath. Even though Phil is more complete than Ronnie, body part by body part, he's simply giving up too much size and would be getting overshadowed for the most part. The only poses I would have him winning are the side tricep and probably the ab and thigh, just because Ronnie's so weak in those ones. The most muscular, he would certainly be competitive as well, but overall it's just not enough. And lastly, let's not forget about Jay Cutler, since this is the only other Mr. O who can potentially hang with Ronnie size-wise. But unfortunately for Jay, his back was never good enough to be a real threat to a prime Ronnie Coleman. And the only reason Jay ever even beat him is because injuries and age caught up to Ronnie, and he was a far cry from his best in 2006 when Jay finally dethroned him. Even Cutler has admitted this much in interviews. So Jay in 2009 or even 2010, I don't think could stand up to a 2003 Ronnie Coleman. So that's what's up, guys. As Cutler said, how do you beat that? In my mind, Ronnie was simply unstoppable this year and would defeat any other version of Mr. Olympia in history. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, this isn't about who your favorite Mr. Olympia is, but who do you honestly believe would win in a virtual showdown? And make sure to say the year, too. So try to be impartial, that's what I'm doing here. Best believe 2003 Ronnie Coleman is not my favorite bodybuilder. He's a little bit too, kind of big and bloated for my taste. But, just objectively speaking, I think, based on the way the judges operate, that this would be the guy that would come out on top of everybody. So thanks for watching, and feel free to leave a like or subscribe for more. Until next time, homies, I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.